Welcome to Wii Vault, a series where I look back at old Wii games, take a look at the story, visuals, and gameplay, and see if those games were good, hold up today, and if they should come back. Today's guest, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, a game developed by Beenox, published by Activision, released in 2010 to obviously the Wii, as well as the PS3, Xbox 360, the 3DS, and Windows. It's a game about 4 different Spider-Men across 4 different dimensions. Now, let's see if this game is purely nostalgic or if it's actually a good game. The story starts off with Mysterio in some museum trying to steal some tablet, the Tablet of Order and Chaos, when the Amazing Spider-Man intervenes and ends up punching and breaking the tablet, sending different pieces off into different dimensions. Mysterio grabs his remaining piece of the tablet and runs away, and Madam Web then appears to tell the Amazing Spider-Man that they must collect the pieces of the tablet and put it back together. She says that she's calling upon the help of 3 other Spider-Men to accomplish this mission. We then cut back to Mysterio with his piece of the tablet, realizing it's giving him some special powers, allowing him to use real magic, not just his hand tricks and illusions. And he now craves the entire tablet for himself. So then the Amazing Spider-Man, the Ultimate Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Man 2099 each began collecting pieces of the tablet in their own dimension. And it's always after them having fallen into enemy hands and them having to beat those enemies to get the pieces of the tablet. The Amazing Spider-Man being the Spider-Man we all know, the Ultimate Spider-Man being Spider-Man Peter Parker with the Venom symbiote, Spider-Man Noir being a Great Depression era Spider-Man who's a PI in an all black and white world but still Peter, and then Spider-Man 2099 being Miguel O'Hara of the year 2099 being Spider-Man. The first act is each of those Spider-Men getting their own piece, putting them back together to create about a quarter of the tablet and giving it back to Madam Web and her sending them out once again to collect more of the tablet. The second act is them doing the exact same thing, each getting a piece of the tablet, putting them together, being about a quarter of the tablet, and giving them to Madam Web. But this time, Mysterio intervenes when Madam Web is getting the tablet and is pretty much being held hostage now by Mysterio. And Mysterio sends off Peter to go collect the final pieces of the tablet so he can have all of that power to himself. So then each Spider-Man gets their final piece of the tablet from their dimension, they bring it all together, and Amazing Spider-Man trying to figure out a way to save Madam Web, but not let Mysterio get this final piece of the tablet. He goes in, tries to save her, and while he does save her, he fails at keeping the piece from Mysterio, as Mysterio is able to get the whole tablet to himself and just get some godlike powers, and reality as a whole starting to break apart, all dimensions starting to collide together, and we get the final fight against Mysterio, where all 4 Spider-Men come together and all take a turn fighting Mysterio, each with their own unique methods that we've kind of come to know based on playing the game. And it ends with Amazing Spider-Man dealing the final blow in the gameplay section and then having a cutscene of each Spider-Man passing Mysterio around, beating him up, and Amazing Spider-Man getting the tablet back. Amazing Spider-Man then gives the tablet to Madam Web, and each Spider-Man goes off into their own dimension. And that ends the game. It's a pretty basic storyline for the game. Pretty much the story, all it really was just to give reason to having all 4 Spider-Men work together and being able to switch across all dimensions. So the story is really just to explain the gameplay and not much else. Nothing really special about it, nothing that sticks with you, no real lessons. Doesn't make any real statements. So for it getting the job done of explaining having to use the multi-dimensional Spider-Man, but nothing that really sticks with the player, I'm giving the story a 4 out of 10. Now, before you start to get a little worked up, I know that the story is not the important part of this game. Anyone defending this game, pointing that the story is not important, I understand that, and I'm going to do my best to not let the story, or really lack thereof, weigh down the overall grade for the game. But just purely looking at the story by itself, it's a 4 out of 10. I mean, it's held back by the Wii. This section is always going to be about art direction, since all these games are on the same console and are shackled by the same limitations. But the art direction in this game is actually pretty good. I like how they do each dimension, trying to give it its own art style. With Spider-Man Noir being this black and white world with this Great Depression theme. Spider-Man 2099 being quite the opposite of this bright, futuristic techno world. Done very well. Amazing Spider-Man being a more comic book themed section of the game where Spider-Man himself looks hand-drawn sometimes. And then Ultimate Spider-Man being the more traditional video game graphics, video game looking Spider-Man world. And then the cutscenes in this game actually look really good, although they do kind of take away the individual art style from all the Spider-Man, where anytime you see a cutscene with all of the Spider-Man in them, and they all look about the same, like they could be from the same world, it takes away their individualism. It just makes them look more like they're trying to be like a movie kind of aesthetic, a movie type visuals, which is kind of cool in its own right, but it does take away the unique established art style for each Spider-Man. But the in-game graphics, very pixelated. Obviously, it's on the Wii, but nothing too special done. I mean, they all stick to the same theme within their dimensions, so there's like some cohesion there that is really nice. And since there's different visuals in each dimension, you don't get too bored with them. So overall, for their dedication to the art styles, the great cutscenes, both kind of carrying the lesser in-game graphics, I'm going to give the visuals a 9 out of 10. Pretty high praise. I mean, on the Wii, I'm always going to be really lenient in this section because I'm keeping in mind that it's on the Wii, and the dedication to the art styles, the great cutscenes, even given the hardware, this one gets a 9 out of 10. The gameplay in this game is separated into 14 stages, and that includes the tutorial. Each stage, you essentially fight through waves of enemies, save some civilians, and fight the enemies usually twice. Once just how they are normally, and then once when they get this power-up boost from the tablet. There being some differences in between, each dimension Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man is pretty much like the base gameplay for the game. Nothing overly specific to him that I could think of off the top of my head. Spider-Man 2099 having these dive sections where he uses his glider that's built into his suit to dive down, dodging debris, doing different things. Spider-Man 29 also has this accelerated vision mode where everything goes super slow, and you as the player get to kind of take a breather almost and be able to survey what's around you, dodge any type of missiles that are coming at you, and plan your attack more accordingly. Those are probably the two most unique things about the Spider-Man 29 sections of the game. Ultimate Spider-Man. He has this rage mode that you can activate because he has the symbiote. He pretty much just gets to unleash the full power of the symbiote. This mode was pretty much mostly used when you would just be attacking this absolute army amount of grunts. I mean, huge waves of enemies. And that was another unique thing about his stage. He was the only one that truly had that massive amount of base level grunts attacking you all at one time. Those being the unique identifiers for his stage. And then Spider-Man Noir easily had the most unique gameplay experience there because he had these stealth, not optional missions where you're just sneaking around in the shadows and quietly and sneakily webbing up grunts, defeating them, making takedowns on them as you try to stealthily navigate through the enemies, which was very fun and very unique, as well as him just having a more unique feel to his own world with the Depression era and the dialogue that was used. Because even Spider-Man 2099's, they add one word, shock, that they use kind of like the F word in his time period being the only dialogue difference between it. But since there is something to go off in the Great Depression era, the dialogue there feels way more unique than any of the other dimensions. His was definitely a fun one, definitely one I look forward to playing the most. But the most unique feature of this game, like I said, each stage, you fight enemies, you save civilians, and you have boss fights. Most unique thing about this game was within those boss fights where there was a boxing section. For most boss fights, I don't think all of them had them, but a lot of them did, using the nunchuck and the Wii Remote as each fist, swinging on the enemies, having to dodge them. Real up close and personal, something I wouldn't have expected in a Spider-Man game, And it's not necessarily something that I think we need to see again in a Spider-Man game, but that was a nice risk that I think really paid off, and that was a lot of fun when it worked. It didn't always work, mainly in the Spider-Man Noir stages, the dodging specifically, I mean. I don't know what was going on. It didn't always work, which was super frustrating. And it was truly some of the most annoying parts of this game. But while the boxing did birth some of the most annoying parts of this game, it was also definitely some of the most fun in this game. So a lot there with the boxing sections, but very, very fun. Now, the combat in this game was mostly just spamming the one attack button. That's right, one attack button. Now, I think in the upgrade screens, you could upgrade to adding in some web shots to, web up enemies, or a web sling too, where you would just kind of web them and swing right to your enemy to try to add a little bit more to combat, but it still ended up mostly being spamming the one attack button, or dodging and jumping around and then just spamming the button again. Now, there was a dodge button in this game that did add a little bit of fluidity to combat with his dodging. They usually ended up working pretty well. Sometimes it didn't. But for the most part, the dodge mechanic in this game did complement the combat very well, but it's just a very limited combat in the game. And there's supposed to be this guard or shield breaker combo that you do in the game, where I think you just hold B, and you're supposed to break the shield of whoever you're fighting so you can hit them. I don't know what was going on, but it did not work in the game. I would do it, and it just would not break their shield. It just registered it as a normal hit, which was so annoying. It really dragged on and prolonged some of the combats, because I'd have to either run around behind them to hit them or just wait for them to attack, and I dodge and then hit them. Very aggravating. It was supposed to work, and for whatever reason, that one's probably, if I had to guess, is a Wii-specific thing, just did not work. And then the game had two upgrade screens. One combat upgrade where you get new attacks, which I kind of covered earlier, not really adding too much to the actual combat, or increase some of the damage done by certain attacks, things like that. And then the other screen being the character upgrade screen. This is where you increase health regeneration, the stamina bars for Spider-Man 29 and Ultimate Spider-Man's different unique mechanics, and this is where also you would get cool suits. This game actually did have a suit variants, very limited selection. I think you had 4 total suits for each Spider-Man. That's 16 suits, so I guess it's not as limited as I thought it was. And honestly, the suits were all right. I mean, they definitely some cool suits, but I think for the most part, every Spider-Man's best suit was probably their base suit, which makes sense, as there's probably a reason those are the suits they're using. Now, back to the boss fights in this game. The boss fights actually were pretty varied. There's 13 total bosses in this game. None feel too similar to the others. They kind of would cycle through the different ways you'd have to fight them, whether it be luring a boss into one area and attacking them there, or dodging a boss's attack and then them giving you a window of opportunity to hit them, or using different elements within the stage to weaken and then attack the bosses. Nothing too complicated with the boss fights, which is a good thing. All the boss fights felt pretty fun, felt true to the villain that it was supposed to be, and the boss fights were probably the highlight of actually playing the game, with one exception, which I'll get into in a second, because it's the final thing that happens in the game, so I'll talk about it last. But the boss fights were so good that I usually ended up feeling, while playing the stage, this desire to just get to the boss fight. But just fighting through waves of enemies, saving civilians, doing whatever, it felt very repetitive, and the only real thing I was looking forward to each stage was fighting the boss. So there were just some times where I was really getting annoyed of just having to save whoever or fight whoever that wasn't the boss. I was there for the boss fights, and when a boss fight wasn't happening, very quickly the game just felt very boring. Just waiting to get to the boss fight. And sometimes the story, it would have made sense to have just fought the boss, but they would add in some BS to prolong the wait to fight the boss. Very, very aggravating at times, but the boss fights themselves were really good. Except for the last one, the Mysterio boss fight. The Mysterio boss fight was in its own stage in this game, and every stage in this game is about 25 to 40 minutes. The Mysterio one was just 20 minutes. It's half than some of the stages were, half the time that some of those stages were. And you circle, each Spider-Man takes a turn fighting him, so you get 5 minutes of each Spider-Man going up against Mysterio. And honestly, I probably could have done that even quicker. There was like 2 times I didn't realize what I needed to do. So if I even knew what I was doing from the start, that boss fight could have been like 15 minutes, and that is insane to spend this whole game playing as these four different Spider-Men and having really poor send-off. Spider-Man Noir being the most disappointing one. He has the most unique gameplay in there, and all that ends up happening is he sneaks through the shadows and gets like one sneak hit on Mysterio, and that's it for Spider-Man Noir. Having the most unique world, the best dialogue of the grunts, the most unique gameplay. To just finish with that, very disappointing. Another really disappointing one was Spider-Man 2099's. His fight against Mysterio is just falling, shooting some like hexes at him, and he's just diving down, dodging him, and hits him, and then, they separate, and he does it 2 more times. That's it. He just dives down, dodges debris, hits Mysterio 3 times, and then he's gone. It wasn't really that fun. Those dive sections were not that fun. And to end it off with a dive section for Spider-Man 29 was just not good. Ultimate Spider-Man's was kind of cool. I mean, a little more unique than the others, where he would just fight these, bunch of waves of grunts, which I'll get into. I don't like fighting grunts in a boss fight, but you fight a bunch of grunts as Mysterio shoots down these balls that have like shadow projections of all the bosses you fought in the game, which is kind of cool concept-wise. It didn't really work out in the game, but you just break the balls and hit Mysterio, and that's it. Really quick thing, real quick send-off. And then Amazing Spider-Man, you just hit these balls at Mysterio. You hit these glowing balls that explode on Mysterio, and you have to fight grunts to get to these balls. I do not like fighting grunts in boss fights, especially a final boss fight. I love just a one-on-one boss fight. That intimacy feels so much more rewarding in a game than fighting these grunts and this boss at the same time. A lot going on the screen. Just that one-on-one. That's what I look forward to most in these boss fights. And it just wasn't there in the Mysterio one. So, the final boss fight, the stakes are massive, and it just falls flat. Was really disappointed. And finally, what everyone cares about hearing about when it comes to a Spider-Man game, the web swinging. Beenox hates web swinging. They just have to. Because this game and Edge of Time both absolutely devalued and underappreciated the web swinging in Spider-Man. In this game, these are very linear stages, sometimes in enclosed spaces, and the web swinging is just essentially just to help you get there faster. There's no freedom in it. There's no fun in the web swinging. It's just very much point A to point B movement. And that's not that fun in Spider-Man with the web swinging. This game is very much an arcade game where you just move very linearly, fight some grunts, and have a boss fight at the end of each stage. And I like having boss fights, and this game did the boss fights very well, but it just doesn't lend too well to a Spider-Man game because it just absolutely takes away any of the fun that you could have with web swinging. So gameplay became pretty repetitive, fighting waves of enemies, saving civilians, fighting the boss twice. Now, while the boss fights were really fun, the combat was kind of iffy. I wouldn't say it was completely bad, but just very limited. And the non-existent web swinging, I'm going to have to give the gameplay of this game a 4 out of 10. Now, another thing I like to do in this series is take a look at the voice cast of every game. And this one has a fun theme, as every single Spider-Man in here is being voiced by an actor who has voiced him previously, all in different Spider-Man cartoon series. The Amazing Spider-Man in this game was voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, who played him in Spider-Man, the new animated series, which I believe was on MTV, and one that I actually do have some memories of, and I feel like I might have a DVD of it somewhere, but I'm not sure. And most known for his role as Barney in How I Met Your Mother. The Ultimate Spider-Man is voiced by Josh Keaton, the voice of Spider-Man in The Spectacular Spider-Man. By far my favorite cartoon Spider-Man adaptation, hands down. Beautiful cartoon, 2 seasons. If you haven't seen it, Please take the time to check it out. He also voices Shiro in Voltron. And he also voices the Amazing Spider-Man in Spider-Man Edge of Time, kind of sequel to this game made by Beenox as well, which I already have a video on out, so check that out if you want. Spider-Man Noir is voiced by Christopher Daniel Barnes, the Spider-Man from the 90s cartoons, and is also the voice of Eric in The Little Mermaid. I did not know that. Very cool. And he voices Miguel O'Hara in Spider-Man Edge of Time as well. To me, he's probably the voice of Miguel, just because I have really distinct memories from that game, and I loved his portrayal of Miguel in that game. So again, got the video out. Check it out. But in this game, Spider-Man 2099 is voiced by Dan Gilvezan. I hope I said that right. The Spider-Man and his amazing friend Spider-Man from back in the 80s, as well as the Bumblebee voice. Very, very cool. But on a side note, I actually really didn't like their portrayal of Miguel in this game. And I by no means blame the voice actor, purely writing. He just felt more like another Peter. Very quippy, just very 80s, how you would probably imagine them to have an 80s Spider-Man act like. None of that kind of seriousness that, makes Miguel different from the other Spider-Man, and I don't think of Miguel as completely unfunny, but more maybe a dry sense of humor or maybe funny in unintentional ways. But, man, this Spider-Man was just campy Spider-Man to the max, which by itself isn't bad, but making that Miguel's characteristics, I wasn't a big fan of. Madam Web in this game is Suzanne Blaisley. I hope I said that right. She's Wanda from Fairly Odd Parents. Mysterio is David Kaye, or Clank from Ratchet and Clank. Hammerhead, John DiMaggio, or Bender from Futurama. Or also the Joker from Batman Under the Red Hood, one of the most popular and famous animated DC or just animated superhero movies ever. Didn't know that. Was really cool to find out. And that movie also has the Amazing Spider-Man from this game, Neil Patrick Harris, playing Nightwing. Wasn't a big fan of his Nightwing, but it's not what we're here to talk about. Deadpool is Nolan North, from Nathan Drake from Uncharted. Just another quick side note, I did not like the Deadpool in this game. From his costume to kind of how they used him in the story for that stage, and just him being kind of held back by the teen rating of this game, Deadpool very much being rated M for mature type of character. Doc Ock in this game is Tara Strong, who voices damn near everything. Kraven and Green Goblin are both voiced by Jim Cummings, the voice of Winnie the Pooh. And Electro, whose stage I really didn't like, is voiced by Tom Wilson. Biff from Back to the Future. He's the only voice actor here who I recognize from a live-action role. Silver Sable being Jennifer Hale, the female Commander Shepard from Mass Effect. The narrator in this game is Stan Lee, who you know. But on the off chance you don't, he is the creator of Spider-Man, giving us this character and many decades of pure joy. And just as additional voice, James Arnold Taylor, who was Harry Osborn in Spectacular Spider-Man, as well as the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Clone Wars, who I never knew was the same person. I found that out while doing the research for this video. I just remember playing this game and hearing him as a grunt in this game and being like, oh my god, dude, hey, that's Harry Osborn. I recognize that voice perfectly. I think he was just doing the same voice as he did for Harry, but I did not know that voice was also Obi-Wan. Incredible cast. They all did a great performance. Never had a moment to complain about the voice acting in this game. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions is a game with a great concept, playing as 4 different Spider-Man across 4 different dimensions. Each of their own dimensions with its own art style, and the Spider-Man having their own gameplay mechanics and combat styles, while fighting dimension-specific bosses, each boss fitting the theme and aesthetic of their own dimension, and these boss fights being a true highlight of the game with the unique mechanic of boxing these bosses. All of them being unique experiences and rewarding enough to beat, with the notable exception of the final boss fight against Mysterio. A game with basic combat, a good enough upgrade system, cool alternate suits but completely devalued web swinging, with in-game graphics that are a little poor but the art direction and the cutscenes being able to carry it through that. So, Spider-Man Shattered Dimension ends with a score of a 5 out of 10. Repetitive and eventually boring gameplay that is carried by the concept of the game that is presented in a real bare-bones storyline with really good art direction and in-game cutscenes. I'm editing up the video right now, and I totally forgot while recording to say if I think this game should come back in any way, and the answer is yes. Purely off concept. Beenox should be involved in absolutely no capacity, but just a Spider-Verse game with Peter, Gwen, Miles, and Miguel. I think that would be really fun. What I would do in that game is the storyline could be whatever. I mean, I trust Insomniac to do any type of good storyline that they want to do, but I would have, for the actual gameplay part, Miguel and Miles have unique spider set powers that could lend to more unique gameplay, and so they could stay normal. And then Gwen and Peter are very similar. As far as I know, there's not really any power differences between the two. So you give one of them a Venom symbiote for their dimension, for their gameplay, and have fun with that, like they did with having one of the Peters in this game have a Venom symbiote. But I would love for this game to come back. And now back to the rest of the video. Now, where does Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions rank among all Wii games I've looked at on this channel? Number 4, behind Wii Sports and both Ben 10 games, but above Spider-Man Edge of Time. Now, here's a look at what the next video in this series is going to be. But which one should come next after that one? Spider-Man Web of Shadows or Bakugan Defenders of the Core? Let me know in the comments below, as well as what you liked about this video and what you didn't like, what you agreed with the most and what you disagreed with the most. Please like and subscribe to catch what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep gaming. Fortnite! Fortnite! Should I be closer to the camera? I'll play around with that next video.